for some reason, this Veterans Day seems extra special, at least to me personally. And it has nothing to do with anything other than the kind of year 2020 is, and all the political stuff and the pandemic and everything. It just kind of feels like the veterans really, for some reason, stick out in my heart for some reason. And it's really interesting because today is Veterans Day, and then they've been really on my heart lately, so I thought, oh, that's kind of coincidental. And I was reading an article. It was in U.S. News. It was an article from like 2017, I think is what it was. And I don't know if U.S. News is fake news or whatever. I don't know anything about that political stuff. But it was called 1968, the year that changed America forever. And that was the title of the article. I'm thinking, wow, 2020 is kind of like the year that changed America forever, I think. I mean, it's changed a lot of our lives probably forever. But I'm going to read you a little bit out of this article, just to kind of tell you what 1968 was for those of you like me that wasn't there, and kind of what that time was. And I'll tie it into a veterans thing, but I want you to understand where I'm going here. So I'm going to read this article, and you guys will identify with this. So it's really interesting. So in 1968, the country seemed to be having a nervous breakdown as battles erupted over the Vietnam War, cultural values, and race. It was a hinge point in history, one of the most consequential, tumultuous years in the American experience, and it changed the country forever. One traumatic event followed another as a wide array of social and political trends that have been building for years reached critical mass. Sounds similar to what we've been dealing with, right? So during that span of 12 months, a half century ago, 1968, that's a long time ago. Well, sorry for, yeah. Anyways, there were two shocking assassinations, growing and sometimes violent opposition to the escalating Vietnam War, hardening class differences, severe economic problems, an increasingly impatient civil rights movement that gave rise to combative and angry power advocates. And that wasn't all. So does this sound familiar? I mean, 2020 has had all this except for the Vietnam War, obviously. So added to all this so far in 1968, there is a rise of feminism, doubts about the credibility of the nation's leaders, a growing rebellion of young people against their parents' values, campuses revolts against authoritarian administrators and lifestyle constraints. So check this out, lifestyle constraints. A new sexual freedom made possible by birth control pill, and overall a ferocious culture war. It was a culture war over value issues such as abortion, crime, patriotism, prayer in school, freedom of speech, and respect for institutions. We haven't changed much since 1968, have we? We're still there. And it was all dramatized and magnified by popular culture and an increasingly aggressive news media eager to hold political and cultural leaders accountable for society's shortcomings. So I'm reading this article. I was like, man, nothing has changed. We're still fighting these same problems. In 2020, 52 years later, basically, or whatever it is, I'm not very good at math, but 50 years later, we're still dealing with this. So I'm going to continue on the article. Many Americans thought their country was having a nervous breakdown. Underlying the public mood was a growing sense that a horrible toxin had been let loose in the land that manifested itself in an assassination of Reverend Martin Luther King and Democratic presidential candidate Robert Kennedy. And I remember my parents told me, like you can probably ask anybody who's a boomer, what it was like then. And it was probably pretty crazy, kind of like what it says. I feel like we're kind of experiencing the same thing, but we haven't had any assassinations yet. This year's not over, and who knows what's going to happen now. We've had, anyways. I'm going to read on the article. The pervasiveness and power of television with the tube, TV, in virtually every home intensified the hurricane of change. Vietnam was dubbed the living room war because of TV. But there also was a living room culture war that brought a parade of hippies, yippies, hard hats, revolutionaries, hedonists, shock comedians, boundary-breaking TV shows to those living rooms in prime time nearly every night. Americans who lived through it remain divided on what it all meant, on whether, on balance, the trends of 1968 were beneficial or harmful to the nation. So, you think 2020 is beneficial or harmful for our nation? Probably harmful, but apparently we don't learn from our mistakes either. So, anyways, these trends included rising cynicism about government and other institutions which seemed to be engulfed in lies and committed to mindless conformity. In some ways, historians say America nearly lost its mind and its soul. In other ways, historians argue the nation reinvented itself and became a more tolerant, less constrained place, more willing to let people express their individuality and challenge authority. We have that. Overall, the upheavals of that year, both positive and negative, made it clear that once social change reaches a critical mass, it can't be stopped. And the changes that happen then live on today. In this article, there's more, but this is all I'm going to read. According to Lenny Steinhorn, a historian and communications professor at American University in Washington, who has studied the 60s, says this: 1968 was the perfect storm that crystallized the differences in society. It's a lot like 2020. 1968 was a very, very, very bad time to be in, really, honestly. I would not want to live through 2020 again. And I was to think that my mom wouldn't want to live through that again either. And what this got me thinking about was, this was a very bad time in our country's history. And there was a draft. People had to go fight for a country they didn't believe in. And like in World War I, World War II, it was really it was an honor to go do those things, to go fight for your country and die for your country. And Vietnam was different. It was, I'm not a historian, I don't know much about war, but I think it was the last war there was a draft. But, and our church has a lot of really conservative people. So, could you imagine go fighting for your president, who will be Joe Biden? It would be very hard for some of you. And others of you would be just on board, let's go do it. And that's kind of how it was in that 1968 year. There was people burning their draft tickets or draft dodgers, But it was to the point where you either were called a baby killer or whatever. I mean, the people were criticizing those who were getting drafted, who were still trying to honor their country and honor their family, and in such a bad time. And it may have been for the wrong reasons, but I feel like there's a blessing coming out of it. There is. I'm going to take my stepdad, for example. He told me he went crying and screaming on March 1969. Following this year, but he went. He left Martinsville, Illinois. I think he said it was at 2 o'clock in the morning.